Over 42,000 people were watching the live stream when a flight attendant accused a calm, well-dressed black man of faking his first-class ticket. Within minutes, the story spread across America. What looked like a simple case of wrong seat turned into a $847 million scandal that exposed hidden bias inside one of the biggest airlines in the country. And the man at the center of it all, he wasn't just any passenger, he was the most powerful person on that plane. But let me take you back. Let me take you back to where it all started, because this story, it doesn't begin with the cameras or the chaos. It begins with something much quieter, much simpler. It begins with a man taking his seat. His name was Ethan Cole, and on that Tuesday morning in Dallas, he looked like success itself. The kind of success you notice. A $3,000 Navy suit that fit him like it was painted on. A Rolex Skydweller catching the fluorescent airport lights every time he moved his wrist. Leather shoes so polished you could see your reflection in them. He walked through Dallas Love Field Airport like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Because he had. But this time was different. This time nobody knew who he was. And that was exactly the point. When he boarded Southwest Airlines Flight 2847 to Phoenix, he moved down the aisle with quiet confidence. His briefcase in one hand, his boarding pass in the other. First class. Seat 2A. Right up front where the seats are wider, where the drinks are free, where the service is supposed to be better. He settled in, adjusted his jacket, placed his briefcase under the seat in front of him. Then he sat back and waited. And that's when she appeared. Her name was Megan Riley. Flight attendant. 28 years old. Blonde hair pulled back tight, smile professional and practiced. She'd been flying for Southwest for 6 years, and she knew how things were supposed to go. She knew who belonged where. Or at least, she thought she did. She walked past Ethan once. Then twice. The third time, she stopped. Stood right there in the aisle, looking down at him with her head tilted just slightly to the side. Like she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice was polite. Professional. But there was something underneath it. Something sharp. "Can I see your boarding pass?" Ethan looked up slowly. His face was calm. Almost peaceful. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his boarding pass, handed it to her without a word. Megan studied it, turned it over, held it up to the light like she was checking a counterfeit bill. Her lips pressed together in a thin line. "And your ID, please." Now, here's what you need to understand. This wasn't a random security check. Other passengers in first class weren't being asked. The woman in 1C with her designer handbag? Not asked. The businessman in 3A working on his laptop? Not asked. Just Ethan. He pulled out his driver's license. Texas. Current. Everything legitimate. Handed it over. Megan looked at it. Looked at him. Looked at the boarding pass again. And then she said something that made the whole cabin go quiet. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your real ticket." The words hung in the air like smoke. Ethan didn't move. Didn't blink. Just looked at her with those calm, steady eyes and said nothing. "Sir?" Megan's voice was louder now. Sharper. "This seat is for first-class passengers only. If you purchased this ticket from an unauthorized website or if someone gave it to you, I need to know right now." A woman in seat 3B pulled out her phone. Her name was Lily Porter, and she had a feeling something was about to happen. Something people needed to see. She opened her social media app, hit the live button, and pointed her camera at the scene unfolding in front of her. Within seconds, viewers started joining. 10, 20, 50. "I think we've got a situation here on Southwest Flight 2847, Lily whispered into her phone. "You guys seeing this?" Ethan checked his watch. The Rolex caught the light. 12 minutes. He'd been sitting there for 12 minutes, and Megan Riley was still standing over him, waiting for him to move. Waiting for him to confess. Waiting for him to prove he didn't belong there. But he didn't move. Other passengers were starting to notice now. Heads turning. Whispers spreading like wildfire. The man in 4A leaned over to his wife. "What's going on up there?" She shrugged, but she was filming too. Megan's face was getting red. Frustrated. "Sir, you're holding up the entire flight. If you don't have legitimate documentation, I'm going to have to call the captain." Ethan looked up at her. His voice was quiet, controlled, almost gentle. "I know, just 2 words." But the way he said them made something twist in the air. Like he wasn't worried. Like he was waiting for exactly that. Megan's hand went to her radio. "Captain Reynolds, I need you up front. We have a situation in first class." Lily's viewer count jumped to 300. Then 500. Then 800. The comments were rolling in fast. What's happening? Is he being kicked off for sitting in first class? This is insane. Record everything. Captain Jack Reynolds came through the cockpit door like a man who'd seen everything. 23 years of flying. 23 years of dealing with difficult passengers, crying babies, drunk travelers, people who couldn't follow simple instructions. He had a rule, and it had served him well. Never hesitate when dealing with a problem passenger. Deal with it fast. Deal with it firm. Get the plane in the air. He was tall, gray at the temples. Confident in that way pilots are confident, like they're used to being the final word on everything that happens in their aircraft. What's the problem here? His voice filled the cabin. Megan turned to him, relief flooding her face. Captain, this passenger refuses to show me proper documentation. He's sitting in first class, but I don't believe his ticket is legitimate. He won't cooperate, and he's being aggressive. Now that was interesting, because Ethan hadn't raised his voice once. Hadn't made a single aggressive move. He'd just been sitting there, perfectly still. But that's how it works sometimes, isn't it? Existing in a space where someone decides you don't belong becomes aggression all by itself. Reynolds held out his hand. Let me see the boarding pass. Megan handed it over. He studied it for a long moment. Checked the seat number. Checked the name. Checked the barcode. Everything looked legitimate. Everything was legitimate. He looked at Ethan, then at the boarding pass, then back at Ethan. And that's when Megan leaned in close to the captain. Close enough that the passengers couldn't quite hear. But Lily's phone caught it. Caught every word. Captain, look at him. Really look. Does that man belong in first class? The cabin went silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. Someone's bag shifting in the overhead compartment. The distant sound of another plane taking off outside. But nobody was breathing. Because everyone heard it. Everyone understood what she was really saying. What she was really asking. Ethan's eyes lifted. Met hers directly. And when he spoke, his voice was soft. Gentle. But every word cut like a blade. People like me, he repeated slowly. Not a question. A statement. People like me. Reynolds cleared his throat. He'd heard what Megan said. They all had. But he'd worked with her for 3 years. Good employee. Reliable. Never had a complaint. If she said something was wrong, something was probably wrong. Sir, I'm going to need you to step off the aircraft while we sort this out. Ethan didn't move. Sir, I'm the captain of this aircraft, and I'm giving you a direct order. Please gather your belongings and exit the plane. Ethan checked his watch again. 14 minutes now. Lily's viewer count hit 5,000. The comments were exploding. This is racial profiling. Sue them. Don't move, brother. Don't you move. Someone call the news. Megan's voice was shaking now. Shaking with frustration, with anger, with something else. Captain, he bought that ticket off some shady website. People like him don't usually fly up here. I see it all the time. They try to scam their way into first class, and when we catch them, they play the victim. She said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Said it like she wanted witnesses. Like she wanted people to know she was just doing her job. Ethan reached down slowly. Picked up his briefcase. For a moment, everyone thought he was leaving. Thought maybe he'd decided it wasn't worth the fight. But he didn't stand up. He opened the briefcase. Reached inside. And pulled out a wallet. From that wallet, he produced a card. Black. Heavy. Made from metal. An American Express Centurion card. The kind of card that only exists for people who spend more than $250,000 a year. The kind of card that has no spending limit. The kind of card that gets you into airport lounges most people don't even know exist. He held it up. Said nothing. Just let them see it. Megan's face went pale. Reynolds shifted his weight. And then Ethan spoke. His voice was still quiet. Still calm. But now there was steel underneath it. Federal Aviation Regulation 91.11, he said clearly. Prohibits interference with crew members. But it also protects passengers from unlawful restraint and discrimination. Would you like me to continue? Lily's phone nearly fell from her hands. 8,000 viewers now. The comments were moving so fast she couldn't read them. Reynolds' jaw tightened. Sir, I don't care what kind of credit card you have. I'm asking you to leave this aircraft. And I'm telling you, Ethan said softly, that you might want to reconsider that order. Because what's happening right now? It's being watched by thousands of people. And if you proceed with this, it could be classified as unlawful detention. It could also be classified as discrimination. And both of those things? They come with consequences. The radio on Reynolds' hip suddenly crackled to life. Captain Reynolds, we're getting calls from media. CNN and Fox News are both requesting comment about an incident on your aircraft. Can you confirm? Reynolds went still. His hand moved to the radio, but he didn't answer it. Megan looked around the cabin. Saw all the phones. All the cameras. All those faces watching, judging, recording. Captain, she whispered. What do we do? Reynolds had been flying for 23 years. He'd made 10,000 decisions in the air. Quick decisions. Life and death decisions. And right now, he was making another one. He trusted his flight attendant. He trusted his instincts. And his instincts said this man was causing trouble. Call airport security, he said quietly. Have them remove him. 5 minutes later, 2 airport security officers walked down the aisle. They had zip ties on their belts. Radios crackling with chatter. They looked serious. Professional. Ready to handle a problem. The viewer count hit 12,000. One of the officers stopped next to Ethan's seat. Sir, we're going to need you to come with us. Ethan looked up at him. Then at the zip ties. Then back at the officer's face. You might want to reconsider, he said quietly. The officer's hand moved toward the zip ties. Sir, don't make this harder than it needs to be. And that's when Ethan reached into his briefcase one more time. He pulled out a leather document folder. Expensive. Embossed. The kind of thing executives carry to board meetings. He opened it slowly. Removed a single business card. Handed it to the officer. The officer looked down at it. His face went completely white. Like all the blood had just drained straight out of his body. His partner leaned in. What is it? The first officer showed him the card. Whispered something. Just a name. Just a title. The second officer's eyes went wide. Reynolds leaned forward. What? What does it say? The officer turned to him. And when he spoke, his voice was shaking. Captain, this is Ethan Cole. He's the chairman of the Southwest Airlines Board of Directors. The cabin exploded. Not with sound. With silence. The kind of silence that happens when the whole world stops spinning. When everything you thought you knew flips upside down in a single instant. Megan stumbled backward. Her hand went to her mouth. Reynolds's face drained of color. Lily's phone nearly slipped from her trembling hands. 18,000 viewers. 20,000. 25,000. And Ethan Cole? He sat perfectly still in seat 2A. His expression never changed. Calm. Steady. Like he'd been waiting for this exact moment the entire time. Because he had been. The radio crackled again. This time a different voice. Higher up. More urgent. Captain Reynolds, this is operations. Stand down immediately. Do not remove the passenger. Do you copy? Stand. Down. Reynolds stood frozen. His career flashing before his eyes. Everything he'd built. Everything he'd worked for. Evaporating in real time. Ethan finally stood up. Slowly. Deliberately. He adjusted his jacket. Straightened his tie. And when he spoke, every person in that cabin, every person watching on their phones, every person who would later see this video, heard him clearly. This wasn't an accident, he said quietly. It was a test. He looked at Megan. At Reynolds. At the security officers. At all the passengers filming. Southwest Airlines received 47 discrimination complaints this quarter alone. 47 passengers who felt they were treated differently because of how they looked. Who they were. Where they came from. His voice was steady. Measured. But you could hear the emotion underneath it. The anger. The disappointment. The exhaustion of having to prove you belong. So I decided to see for myself. I bought a ticket. I dressed well. I sat in first class. And I waited to see what would happen. He gestured around the cabin. At Megan. At Reynolds. This is what happened. The viewer count hit 42,000. Megan was crying now. Silent tears running down her face. Reynolds couldn't look up. Couldn't look anyone in the eye. And Ethan Cole stood there in his $3,000 suit, in front of seat 2A, and said the words that would change everything. Now we're going to talk about what happens next. The viewer count keeps climbing. The whole country is watching now. And in Chapter 2, you'll discover the devastating statistics that Ethan is about to reveal, and the impossible choice he's about to offer. Because this story, it's just getting started. You know what's strange about truth? It doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it traps you, pins you down right where you're standing, and forces you to look at who you really are. That's what was happening in the cabin of Flight 2847. Truth had just walked in, pulled up a chair, and wasn't going anywhere. Ethan Cole stood there in the aisle, and the entire plane held its breath. 42,000 people watching online. Every major news network scrambling to get the story. And two people, Megan Riley and Captain Jack Reynolds, realizing their lives were about to change forever. This wasn't an accident, Ethan had said. It was a test. And now came the results. Ethan looked around the cabin. At all those faces. Some shocked. Some angry. Some quietly nodding like they'd seen this movie before and knew exactly how it ended. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a tablet. Turned it on. The screen glowed in the cabin light. "Let me show you something," he said quietly. His voice was still calm, but there was weight to it now. The kind of weight that comes from carrying something heavy for too long. He turned the tablet toward the passengers who were close enough to see. Megan leaned in despite herself. Reynolds couldn't look away. It was a document. Official. Full of numbers and names and dates. "In the past 2 years," Ethan said, "Captain Reynolds has removed 17 passengers from premium seating on various flights. 17 people he deemed suspicious or aggressive or not belonging." He paused. Let that number sink in. 15 of those 17 passengers were people of color. The cabin went silent again. But this time, it was a different kind of silence. Heavier. Darker. The kind of silence that makes you want to look away but forces you to keep watching. Reynolds's face went from pale to gray. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Megan was shaking her head slowly. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not, we don't." But Ethan wasn't done. "Megan Riley," he continued, looking directly at her. "In your 6 years with Southwest, you've filed 42 incident reports about passengers in first class. 42. Want to guess how many of those passengers looked like me?" Megan's knees buckled slightly. She grabbed the nearest seat to steady herself. 38, Ethan answered for her. 38 out of 42. Lily's livestream was going absolutely insane now. The comments were flooding in so fast they were just a blur of words and emotions. "I knew it. This is everywhere in America. My hands are shaking. Finally someone with power is calling it out." But here's where the story takes a turn. Here's where it stops being about just one flight and becomes about something much bigger. Ethan swiped to another screen on his tablet. "This quarter alone," he said, his voice getting quieter somehow, which made everyone lean in closer. Southwest Airlines received 47 formal discrimination complaints. 47 passengers who felt they were profiled, harassed, or removed from flights because of their race, religion, or appearance. He looked up, made eye contact with people throughout the cabin. But you know what the real cost is? It's not just the lawsuits we're facing. Not just the 2,000 potential plaintiffs lining up. It's this. Another swipe. Another screen. 2 months ago, Southwest stock was trading at $34.67 per share. Today, it's at $32.15. He let that sit for a moment. That's a loss of $847 million in market value. Gone. Because word gets out. Because people talk. Because in the age of smartphones and social media, you can't hide this anymore. Reynolds finally found his voice. It came out as a croak. I was just following protocol. Passenger safety. We have to be careful about. About what?" Ethan's voice cut through like a knife. Not loud, but sharp. About passengers who pay for their tickets? Follow all the rules? Present valid documentation? Sit quietly in their assigned seats? He took a step closer to Reynolds. Or about passengers who make you uncomfortable because they don't look like what you think first-class passengers should look like. The captain had no answer. No defense. Because they both knew the truth. One of the security officers cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole, sir, we should probably clear the aircraft and—" "No." Ethan's voice was firm. "Nobody leaves. Not yet. Because everyone on this plane needs to see this. Everyone watching needs to understand what happened here and why it matters." He turned back to Megan. She was crying openly now, mascara running down her cheeks, her whole body trembling. "Tell me something, Megan," Ethan said gently. "When you saw me sit down in that seat, what was the first thing you thought?" She couldn't answer. Just shook her head, tears falling faster. "I'll tell you what you thought," Ethan continued. "You thought I didn't belong there. Not because of my ticket. Not because of my behavior. But because of how I looked. Because somewhere deep in your mind, you have a picture of what a first-class passenger looks like. And I didn't match it. I'm not racist," Megan whispered. "I'm not. I have friends who—" "Stop." Ethan held up his hand. I didn't say you were racist. I said you had bias. And there's a difference. Bias is what happens when society teaches you, over and over, who belongs where. Who's suspicious and who's not. Who deserves trust and who needs to prove themselves. He looked around the cabin again. We all have bias. Every single one of us. The question is, what do we do when we see it? Do we defend it? Deny it? Or do we face it? Captain Reynolds was leaning against the cockpit door now, like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. His 23 years of flying, his perfect safety record, his pride, all of it crumbling in real time. I have a son, he said suddenly. His voice was barely audible. My son is mixed race. His mother is black. The cabin shifted. This wasn't what anyone expected. I love my son, Reynolds continued, and now he was crying too, tears rolling down his weathered face. I would die for him. And yet I still. He couldn't finish. But he didn't have to. Everyone understood. Ethan nodded slowly. That's the thing about bias, Captain. It doesn't care about your intentions. It doesn't care about who you love or what's in your heart. It lives in the space between what you believe and what you do. And until you face it, really face it, it'll keep controlling you. The livestream viewer count hit 60,000. Then 70. News vans were already pulling up to the airport. This wasn't just a viral moment anymore. This was a national story. A movement. And it was happening right there, 30,000 feet on the ground, in a plane that should have taken off an hour ago. Ethan put his tablet away, straightened his jacket, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made everyone pay attention. Here's what happens next, he said. I'm going to give both of you a choice. Megan and Reynolds looked at him like drowning people looking at a lifeboat that might not be big enough. Option 1, Ethan continued. You accept immediate termination. You leave Southwest today. We blacklist you from aviation permanently. And you take personal liability for the damages caused by your actions. That's $2.3 million. Each. Megan's knees gave out completely. She sank into the nearest seat. Reynolds gripped the cockpit door, so hard his knuckles went white. Option 2, Ethan said, and something in his voice softened slightly. You choose accountability. Public accountability. You go on national television and tell your story. All of it. Every mistake. Every moment of bias. Every passenger you wronged. You become advocates. You travel to every Southwest hub in the country. You sit in rooms full of employees and you teach them what you learned. You face the anger, the judgment, the consequences, and you do it for as long as it takes. The cabin was so quiet you could hear hearts beating. You spend the next year of your life making this right, Ethan continued. Not in private, not behind closed doors, but in public, where everyone can see, where everyone can judge, where you can't hide from what you did. He paused. That's your choice. Public destruction or public transformation. Lose everything or risk everything to change. Now, here's what you need to understand about this moment. This wasn't just about Megan and Reynolds. This was about every person who'd ever made a mistake and had to decide, do I defend it or do I face it? Megan looked up, her face blotchy and swollen from crying. If we choose option 2, she said, her voice hoarse, does that make it okay? Does that erase what we did? Ethan shook his head. No, it doesn't erase anything. The passengers you hurt, they're still hurt. The damage you caused, it's still done. But it gives you a chance to be part of the solution instead of just part of the problem. He looked at Reynolds. Your son, Ethan said quietly. What do you want him to learn from this? That his father ran away, or that his father had the courage to face the worst part of himself and change? Reynolds' whole body shook. He covered his face with his hands. The live stream chat was exploding. Give them option 2. They don't deserve forgiveness. Everyone deserves a chance to change. My dad would have chosen to run. I'm watching to see what they do. Megan stood up slowly. Her legs were unsteady, but she stood. She looked at Ethan with red, swollen eyes. I have a daughter, she said. She's 7 years old. And if anyone ever treated her the way I treated you. Her voice broke. I want to teach her that people can change. That I can change. She took a shaky breath. I choose accountability. The cabin erupted. Not in cheers. This wasn't something to cheer about. But in something else. Relief, maybe. Or hope. The knowledge that sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes they choose the harder path. All eyes turned to Reynolds. The captain looked at Ethan. Then at Megan. Then down at his hands. I've spent 23 years believing I was one of the good ones, he said quietly. I'm not racist. I don't hate anyone. I have a black son, for God's sake. He looked up, tears streaming freely now. But you're right. I have bias. And it's cost people their dignity, their peace, their right to just exist without being questioned. He straightened up. Military posture. The posture of a man making the hardest decision of his life. I choose accountability. I choose option 2. Ethan nodded once. Just once. But something in his expression shifted. Not quite a smile. Not quite forgiveness. But maybe respect. The kind of respect you give someone who's willing to walk through fire to become better. Okay then, Ethan said. Here's what happens now. He pulled out his phone. Made a call. Put it on speaker. This is Ethan Cole. Initiate the Reynolds-Riley protocol. Full implementation. I want every hub notified by end of business today. A voice on the other end. Confirmed, Mr. Cole. Press conference. Phoenix Airport. 1 hour. Make sure every major network is there. He hung up. Looked at the 2 people whose lives he'd just turned inside out. When this plane lands, he told them, you're going to walk off into a storm. Reporters. Cameras. Questions you don't have answers to yet. It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. Megan nodded, still shaking. Reynolds wiped his face. We'll be ready. No, Ethan said softly. You won't be. Nobody's ever ready for this. But you'll do it anyway. Because that's what accountability looks like. The flight finally took off 20 minutes later. Most passengers had been moved to other flights. But some stayed. Wanted to see this through. Wanted to be part of the story. Lily kept her live stream going the whole way to Phoenix. 112,000 viewers by the time they landed. Her phone battery died twice. People sent her portable chargers through flight attendants. During the flight, something strange happened. Passengers started talking to Megan and Reynolds. Not to yell at them. Not to condemn them. But to talk. To share their own stories. Times they'd been profiled. Times they'd done the profiling. Times they'd stood by and said nothing. A black businessman from row 7 told Reynolds about the time he was removed from a Delta flight for looking suspicious while wearing a Harvard Business School sweatshirt. A Latina woman told Megan about being asked if she was the nanny when flying first class with her own children. An elderly white man admitted he'd once complained about a passenger's strange smell that turned out to be traditional Indian spices from a home-cooked meal. The cabin became something unexpected. Not a courtroom, not a punishment, but a classroom. A place where everyone was learning together. And Ethan? He sat quietly in seat 2A, watching it all unfold. This was what he'd hoped for. Not just exposure. Not just consequences. But conversation. Real, painful, necessary conversation. When the plane touched down in Phoenix, the reality hit. Through the windows, they could see it. News vans. Camera crews. Reporters with microphones. Federal investigators in dark suits. Security forming a perimeter. This was real. This was happening. This was the rest of their lives starting right now. Megan looked at Reynolds. I'm terrified. Me too, he admitted. Ethan stood up. Adjusted his jacket one final time. Fear is good, he told them. It means you understand the weight of what you're about to do. Just remember, you're not doing this alone. And you're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it for every person who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong. The door opened. The sounds of the outside world rushed in. Shouting reporters. Camera shutters clicking. The roar of 100 conversations happening at once. Ethan stepped aside. After you. Megan and Reynolds looked at each other one more time. Then together they walked toward the door. Toward the cameras. Toward the consequences. Toward whatever came next. And behind them, Ethan Cole followed, watching the 2 people he'd caught in their worst moment take their first steps toward becoming better. The live stream ended at 143,000 viewers. But the story was just beginning. The cameras are waiting. The press conference is about to start. And in Chapter 3, you'll discover what happened when Megan and Reynolds faced the nation, and whether people can truly change when the whole world is watching. Because the hardest part isn't the moment you get caught. It's every single moment after. Here's a question nobody asks when someone makes a public apology. What happens the day after? What happens when the cameras stop rolling, and the headlines move on to the next story, and you're left with the wreckage of who you used to be? Because that's where the real story lives. Not in the viral moment. Not in the dramatic confrontation. but in the quiet, brutal work of actually changing. And that's where Megan Riley and Captain Jack Reynolds found themselves. Standing in front of cameras at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, about to face the consequences of everything they'd done. The press conference was chaos. 100 reporters shouting questions. Cameras flashing like lightning. Federal investigators standing off to the side, taking notes. And somewhere in that crowd, the families of passengers who'd been wronged, holding up photos, holding up signs. Justice for Marcus. I was removed too. No more excuses. Ethan Cole stood at the podium first. Calm. Collected. The eye of the hurricane. Today, he said, and the crowd went quiet. Southwest Airlines is announcing the Reynolds-Riley Protocol. A comprehensive anti-discrimination program that will be mandatory for every employee in our company. This isn't a training video you watch once and forget. This is a complete transformation of how we operate. He paused. Let the cameras capture his face. But before I tell you about the protocol, I want you to hear from the two people it's named after. Because they're not being honored today. They're being held accountable. And there's a difference. He stepped back, gestured to Megan and Reynolds, and they walked forward. Now, I want you to imagine what that walk felt like. Every step taking you closer to the microphones, closer to the judgment, closer to having to look into cameras and admit to millions of people that you were wrong. Not wrong in some abstract way, not mistakes were made, but specifically, personally, devastatingly wrong. Megan went first. Her hands shook as she gripped the edges of the podium. Her voice cracked on the first word, and she had to start again. My name is Megan Riley, she said. And I racially profiled a passenger today. Not because I'm a bad person. Not because I hate anyone. But because I let my bias, my unconscious, unexamined bias, make decisions for me. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Too late for apologies." Megan didn't flinch. Didn't defend herself. Just nodded. You're right, she said. It is too late. I can't take back what I did. I can't give Mr. Cole back the dignity I tried to strip from him. I can't erase the humiliation. And I can't undo every other time I did this to someone who didn't have the power to fight back. She looked directly into the camera. But I can tell you what I'm going to do next. For the next year, I'm going to travel to every Southwest location in this country. I'm going to sit in rooms with employees and tell them exactly how I failed. I'm going to show them what bias looks like when it's dressed up as just doing my job. And I'm going to help make sure this never happens to anyone else. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't wipe them away. To every passenger I've wronged, and there are dozens of you, I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. But it's where I have to start. She stepped back. Captain Reynolds stepped forward. If Megan looked shaken, Reynolds looked destroyed. This man who'd commanded aircraft for 23 years, who'd made split-second decisions at 30,000 feet, who'd always been so certain of his judgment, he looked small. Human. Broken. I removed 17 passengers from premium seating in 2 years, he said, his voice hollow. I told myself I was keeping people safe, following my instincts, trusting my experience. He looked down at his hands. But the truth is simpler and uglier than that. I removed people who made me uncomfortable. People who didn't look like what I thought belonged in first class. And 15 of those 17 people were Black, Hispanic, or Middle Eastern. A reporter shouted, Did you know? Did you know what you were doing? Reynolds looked up, met the reporter's eyes. That's the thing. Part of me did know. Part of me felt it every time. That little voice saying, This isn't right, Jack. But I ignored it. I told myself I was being careful, professional, that I was protecting people. His voice broke. I have a son. He's 13. His mother is Black. And every time I look at him, I wonder, how many times has someone looked at him the way I looked at those passengers? How many times has someone decided he didn't belong somewhere just because of how he looks? He wiped his face roughly. I thought I was different. I thought having a Black child made me immune to bias. But it didn't. And that's the hardest thing I've ever had to admit. You can love someone and still carry bias against people who look like them. You can be good in some ways and fail completely in others. The crowd was quiet now. Even the protesters had lowered their signs. I'm choosing accountability, Reynolds continued. Not because it makes what I did okay, but because it's the only way forward. And if my son is watching this, and I hope he is, I want him to see that his father can admit when he's wrong. That his father can change. Ethan stepped forward again, put a hand on Reynolds' shoulder. Just for a moment. The Reynolds-Riley Protocol, Ethan said, starts today. Here's what it includes. First, $50 million committed to anti-discrimination training and oversight. Second, body cameras for all crew members during passenger interactions. Third, third-party audits of every complaint, every removal, every incident. Fourth, a zero-tolerance policy. One proven case of discrimination, and you're done. No second chances. No protecting your own. And fifth, mandatory quarterly training led by people who've been discriminated against. Real stories. Real consequences. Real change. He looked out at the crowd. But here's what I want you to understand. This isn't just about Southwest. This is about every airline. Every business. Every place where people make judgments about who belongs and who doesn't. We're making this protocol open source. Any company can adopt it. Any organization can use it. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. Cole, why not just fire them? Why give them a second chance? Ethan considered the question carefully. Because firing them is easy, he said. It makes us feel better. We can say we dealt with the problem and move on. But here's what I've learned. You can't fire bias. It doesn't work that way. You fire these two, and tomorrow there are 2 more employees making the same mistakes. Making the same judgments. He gestured to Megan and Reynolds. But if we can show that people can change, really change, then maybe we change the culture. Maybe we prove that accountability isn't just about punishment. It's about transformation. The first week was hell. Megan and Reynolds became the most hated people on the internet. Death threats. Doxing. People finding their addresses, their families. Protesters outside their homes. Megan's daughter came home from school crying because other kids said her mom was racist. Reynolds' son stopped talking to him. Wouldn't return his calls. Every news outlet ran their story. Some sympathetic. Most not. The debate raged everywhere. Do they deserve redemption? Can people really change? Or is this just performative accountability? But Ethan had made them a promise. I won't let you do this alone. And he kept it. The first training session was in Houston. A room full of 200 Southwest employees. All mandatory attendants. All suspicious of what they were about to hear. Megan and Reynolds walked to the front of the room. You could feel the hostility. The judgment. A black flight attendant in the 3rd row crossed her arms. So we're supposed to learn from the racists now. Megan didn't flinch. No. You're supposed to hear what racism looks like when it's hiding behind good intentions. When it's dressed up as professionalism. When it's coming from someone who would swear they're not racist. She pulled up a slide. Her own incident reports from 6 years of flying. Look at this, she said. 42 reports. 38 targeting passengers of color. I didn't see it. I told myself I was just good at spotting problems. But the pattern doesn't lie. Reynolds showed his own data. 17 removals. The demographics. The justifications he'd used. Acting suspicious, he read from one report. Wouldn't make eye contact. Made me uncomfortable. That's code. That's bias pretending to be safety. A Hispanic pilot raised his hand. I've been on the receiving end of this. Had TSA tear apart my bag while my white colleagues walked through. What makes you think anything you say matters to me? Reynolds nodded. Nothing I say matters. The only thing that matters is whether I actually change. Whether the system changes. And whether, a year from now, fewer people experience what you experienced. The pilot sat back. Not satisfied. But listening. They did this everywhere. Dallas. Denver. Chicago. Los Angeles. Baltimore. Every Southwest hub. Some sessions were hostile. People walking out. People refusing to listen. Some were heartbreaking. Employees sharing stories of their own discrimination. Their own failures. Their own bias. In Atlanta, a white gate agent stood up and said, I did what you did. Last month. I questioned a woman's ticket because she was wearing a hijab. I didn't even realize I was doing it until she asked me if I'd questioned the white man before her. She was crying. I haven't been able to sleep since. Because I'm not supposed to be that person. Megan walked over to her. Stood next to her. None of us think we're that person, Megan said softly. That's how bias survives. It hides behind our good intentions. Behind our belief that we're different. Better. 3 months in, something started to shift. The hate mail slowed down. The death threats became less frequent. And something else started arriving. Letters. Hundreds of them. Letters from passengers who'd been discriminated against, thanking them for speaking up. Letters from employees who'd caught their own bias because of the training. Letters from people who had no connection to Southwest at all, but were having conversations about bias in their own workplaces, their own families, their own minds. One letter came from a woman named Sarah Whitfield in Ohio. "I was on a United flight last week," she wrote, "and I saw a gate agent questioning a black teenager's ticket. The kid had proper ID, a valid ticket, everything. But the agent kept pushing, and I remembered your story. I remembered seat 2A. So I stood up. I pulled out my phone, and I asked the agent on camera why he was questioning this passenger and not the others. He backed down immediately." She continued, "You probably don't feel like heroes. You probably feel like villains trying to make up for what you did. But your story gave me the courage to speak up." And that kid got on his flight. When Megan read that letter at a training session in Boston, she broke down completely. Couldn't finish reading it. Reynolds took over, his voice thick with emotion. "This is what accountability looks like. Not forgiveness, not redemption, but maybe making things a little bit better than they were before." 6 months in, the data started coming back. Discrimination complaints at Southwest, down 89%. Passenger removals from premium seating, down 76%. Employee incidents reported by third-party auditors, down 92%. But the numbers that mattered most were different. Other airlines started adopting the protocol. United, American, Delta, JetBlue. The protocol spread beyond airlines. Hotels, restaurants, retail chains. The Department of Transportation made parts of it mandatory for all commercial carriers. And every time someone asked Ethan Cole about it, he said the same thing. This didn't start with policy. It started with one flight attendant and one pilot willing to face what they'd done. 9 months in, Reynolds' son finally called him back. "Dad," the boy said, his voice uncertain, "my teacher showed us your talk in class. The one from Chicago." Reynolds held his breath. "She asked us if we thought people could change. If we thought you really meant it." "What did you say?" Reynolds asked quietly. "I said I didn't know yet, but I wanted to find out." Reynolds started crying. "That's fair. That's more than fair. Dad, can I come to one of your sessions? Can I see what you're doing?" 2 weeks later, Reynolds' son sat in the front row of a training session in Seattle. Watched his father stand in front of 300 employees and systematically tear apart every decision he'd made, every bias he'd carried, every time he'd let fear override fairness. When it was over, the boy walked up on stage, hugged his father, and said into the microphone, "I'm proud of you for learning." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. 1 year after Flight 2847, Ethan Cole called a press conference. Megan and Reynolds stood with him. They looked different. Older maybe, but also more solid. Like they'd been broken down and rebuilt into something stronger. 1 year ago, Ethan said, "These two people made a terrible mistake. And today, I want to show you what happened next." He presented the data. The 89% reduction in complaints. The protocol adopted by 17 major companies. The estimated 23,000 incidents of discrimination prevented. But numbers only tell part of the story, Ethan continued. The real story is in the people. He gestured to the side of the stage. A line of people walked out. Passengers who'd been wronged by Megan and Reynolds. 15 of them. They'd all been contacted. All been invited. Some came to confront. Some came to witness. One man came to say something nobody expected. His name was Marcus Johnson. 2 years ago, Reynolds had removed him from first class, claiming he was acting aggressively when he'd asked why his ticket was being questioned. Marcus walked up to the microphone, looked at Reynolds. "I hated you," he said simply. "For 2 years I hated you. You humiliated me in front of my kids. Made me feel like I didn't belong in my own country." Reynolds' head dropped. "But I watched what you did this year," Marcus continued. "I watched you go on TV and admit what you did. I watched you stand in front of hostile crowds and take it. And you know what? I still haven't forgiven you." The room went silent. "But I respect what you're doing. I respect that you didn't run. And because of you, my kids haven't been questioned on a flight since. So I came here to say, keep going. This doesn't make it okay. But keep going anyway." He walked off the stage. Reynolds looked like he'd been hit by lightning. And maybe he had been. The lightning of grace. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. But acknowledgement. Recognition that he was trying. Lily Porter, the passenger who'd live-streamed the original incident, was now the head of Southwest's Dignity Documentation Project. A program that taught passengers how to safely document discrimination and report it. The revolution will be live-streamed, she said at the press conference. And now we're making sure people have the tools to do it right. Her program had been adopted by advocacy groups nationwide. Thousands of people trained in how to document, how to support, how to speak up. And it all started because she'd pulled out her phone in seat 3B and decided that silence wasn't an option. At the end of the press conference, a reporter asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Mr. Cole, do you forgive them?" Ethan looked at Megan and Reynolds, thought about the question. "Forgiveness isn't mine to give," he said finally. "I wasn't the only person they wronged. And the passengers who can't be here, who don't have a voice, their forgiveness matters more than mine." He paused. "But I'll tell you what I do believe. I believe people can change. Not easily. Not without cost. But they can change. And when they do, when they really do the work, they become some of the most powerful teachers we have." He looked directly into the camera. Because they know what it's like to be wrong. They know what it costs. And they can show others how to face it instead of running from it. 2 years after Flight 2847, Ethan Cole boarded another Southwest flight. Dallas to Phoenix. Same route. Same airline. He bought a first-class ticket. Wore a nice suit. Carried his briefcase. When he boarded, the flight attendant greeted him warmly. Checked his ticket without suspicion. Welcomed him to his seat. Her name tag said Maria. As he settled in, Maria leaned down and said quietly, "Mr. Cole, I just want you to know, I went through the Reynolds-Riley protocol training. It changed how I see my job, how I see people." She smiled. "Thank you for seat 2A. Ethan nodded. "Thank you for being willing to learn." The flight took off smoothly. No incidents. No confrontations. No viral videos. Just a man in a suit, sitting in the seat he'd paid for, traveling in peace. And maybe that doesn't sound revolutionary. Maybe that sounds ordinary. But for too many people, for too long, ordinary had been impossible. And that was worth $847 million. That was worth 1 year of public accountability. That was worth everything. If you're watching this story, if you made it all the way to the end, here's what I want you to take with you. Change doesn't happen in silence. It doesn't happen when we pretend bias doesn't exist, or when we perform allyship without action, or when we fire the people who get caught and pretend the problem is solved. Change happens when someone has the courage to sit still in their seat and refuse to move. When someone pulls out their phone and hits record. When someone stands up and asks, "Why are you questioning this passenger and not the others?" Change happens when people like Megan Riley and Jack Reynolds choose the hard path. When they face their worst selves in public and do the brutal work of transformation. Not because they want to be heroes, but because they decided they didn't want to be villains anymore. So here's my question for you. What's your seat 2A? What's the place where you've been made to feel like you don't belong? Or, and this is harder, what's the place where you've made someone else feel that way? What's the bias you carry that you've dressed up as something else? As safety, as professionalism, as just how things are. Because we all have it. Every single one of us. The question is, what do we do when we see it? Do we defend it? Deny it? Run from it? Or do we face it? Do we do the work? Do we change? Ethan Cole sat in seat 2A for 12 minutes and changed an industry. Megan Riley and Jack Reynolds spent a year in the fire and became teachers. Lily Porter pulled out her phone and started a movement. Marcus Johnson chose respect over revenge. And somewhere right now, someone is sitting in their own seat 2A, waiting to see if anyone will stand up for them, waiting to see if anything will change. The revolution will be live-streamed. And it starts with you. Change doesn't happen in silence. It happens when you decide that enough is enough. Record the truth. Share the evidence. Speak for those who can't. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to move. Ethan Cole, Chairman, South